Hey, welcome as we continue our summer series. I hope you're enjoying this break over the Christmas New Year period. It's always good to be able to draw aside from the business and the routines, just to recalibrate ourselves, to rest and refuel, especially as we go into an exciting year. I know some of you have already made the return back to the office, and some of you are continuing to enjoy the last few days of a holiday. Wherever this finds you, I hope that you're ready for what God has for you. I know that as we go into 2026, I'm excited. I'm excited because I believe that every year there's an opportunity for you and I to put a line under what was and to once more dream again and to take hold of the possibilities that exist, the possibilities that God sets before us. The one who says, "Behold, I make all things new." In other words, we're not bound by what was, but we have, so to speak, a fresh piece of paper in front of us that we can let God just lead us into writing our story on for the good of others and for His glory. And so as we do this summer series today, I just want to encourage you with this idea about no matter the dreams and the plans that you have for this year, a lot of it is going to be determined by the atmosphere around you. You see, it's the atmosphere around you that influences more than the plans that you make. Because the atmosphere around you begins to change the attitude, the perspective of people. It changes the way they engage. It changes the way in which they receive you, so to speak. I mean, think about it, for example. The atmosphere is just the prevailing mood or influence around you. And there's a mood, there's an influence around every sphere of life. For example, have you ever been to visit someone who's just experienced a bereavement? You walk into the place and you feel it, don't you? You feel the grief, you feel the loss. You feel all of those emotions because there's that atmosphere around that event and you get drawn into it and you experience it for yourself. Likewise, you go to somewhere that they're having a celebration and you may go there feeling a little bit ho-hum, but the atmosphere begins to draw you in and change you from the inside out. It's the same with every sphere of life. If you go somewhere that's negative, where people are pessimistic, where people are always moaning, complaining, you feel yourself drawn down by it. But if you go somewhere where people are always optimistic, where people are talking things up, where people are gracious, where people are generous in their attitude towards others, you feel encouraged and you feel built up as well, don't you? You see, that's why I say that so much of what's going to happen in your life this year is going to be influenced more by the atmosphere around you than the plans that you make. So let me ask you this question. What spiritual atmosphere surrounds you? What spiritual atmosphere surrounds you? I frame it that way because here at Abundant Life, we talk about being hope carriers. We believe that we're a community of hope for our city and beyond, and each of us is a hope carrier. We carry the hope of the gospel. We carry the hope of the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one who began all, who is before all things and in whom all things are held together, the one who gave himself for our sake and for our salvation, the one who died as we, so that we could live as He. And we're called to live that hope. And to live that hope means that we have to have this spiritual atmosphere around us. And that atmosphere is really mission critical. You see, to have a positive spiritual atmosphere means that we carry something on the inside that's greater than what we have on the outside. You see, if you don't want to be brought down by the atmosphere of others, the atmosphere inside of you has to be greater. You think about a helium balloon, for example, and a normal balloon. Take a balloon that's been blown up by the breath of a lung. The atmosphere inside is the same as the atmosphere around it, and so it just gets drawn down by gravity. But when it's filled with helium, the atmosphere inside is greater than the atmosphere around it, and so it rises above it. In the same way, you need to have a spiritual atmosphere around you that is greater than the atmosphere of others, the atmosphere of the world. Otherwise, it's going to draw you down. It's going to crowd in upon you. And no matter the dreams and the hopes that you carry, you're going to find yourself just hanging on, and you're going to find yourself being drawn, as Paul talks about in the book of Romans, about being conformed to the ways of the world. It's pressuring and conforming you to its image. You see, the atmosphere you carry is important, because the atmosphere you carry changes everything. Let me show you in Scripture. In 1 Samuel chapter 22, we read about how, David's on the run from Saul, who wants to take his life. Even though Saul has been anointed of God to be the next king, Saul pursues him. And as we pick up the story in 1 Samuel, we say David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Soon his brothers and all his other relatives joined him there. Then others began coming. Pardon me. Men who were in trouble or in debt, or who were just discontented, until David was the captain of about 400 men. So here's these people who are distressed, they're in debt, they're discontented. You can imagine the atmosphere around them. There's about 400 of them. They are rebellious now. They are stirred up. They want vengeance. They see themselves as victims and everything else. And they flock to David, who is being pursued by the king. And you think that, okay, the atmosphere of these people is going to draw David into woe is me, and what about my rights? God has called me, therefore. And yet, in 2 Samuel, we read about how these men of discontent, these men who are in trouble, these men whose prevailing atmosphere around them is negative, end up being described as mighty men of valor. Mighty men of valor. They fought incredible, courageous battles against the Amalekites. They fought the Battle of Keilah. And they go on, and they're known for their faithfulness. They're known for their willingness to step out and to trust God in the face of defeat, and let God turn it into victory. So what changed in them? How did they go from being distressed, from being in debt, to being discontented, to becoming mighty men of valor? There was a prevailing spirit over David that was greater than the spirit that was in them, the atmosphere in them. There was a prevailing atmosphere that surrounded David, of hope, of courage, of faithfulness, of trusting God, no matter the circumstances. And that atmosphere around him began to draw these other people into it, so that they were changed. So that the atmosphere around David created this environment where people let go of their discouragement, let go of their discontent. They began to look beyond the troubles and their debts and their worries, and they began to trust God, and they began to look beyond what is to what could be. And as a consequence, they rose. Just like a helium balloon floats up through the atmosphere of the world, their faith carried them above all of the discouragement of the world. And that's why cultivating a spiritual atmosphere is so important, because it changes everything. In John chapter 7, Jesus said, "Anyone who believes in me may come and drink." Why? For the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from their heart. When he said living waters, he was speaking of the Spirit who would be given to everyone believing in him. You see, we're called to change the environments. We're called to live in ways that there's a river of life that flows out of our heart. That our faith we're called to live our faith in ways that make a difference. And that's why it's so important to cultivate a spiritual atmosphere that is going to influence, rather than allowing us to be influenced by the things of this world. Because when we cultivate a relationship with God out of which faith flows freely, what happens is this living water, the water of hope, the water of life that proceeds from the gospel, begins to flow into the lives of others as the Holy Spirit works through us into the lives of others. So let me just share with you some ways that you can begin to cultivate a spiritual atmosphere around you that will make a difference. A spiritual atmosphere, if I could describe it that way, that will help the river of life flow from your heart into the heart of others. First one is simply this, is to remember who you are. To remember who you are. Remember in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 20, we're told we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making his appeal through us. The moment you became a Christian, you became a new creation, and you're no longer of this world, you're of God's kingdom, and you're called to live as a representative of his kingdom. And that's why we're described as ambassadors. And do you know the thing about ambassadors? The ambassadors represent their home country in foreign countries. They live amongst people who are foreigners to them in ways that point people to their home country. And that's what we're called to do. And the thing about ambassadors is that they live amongst the people, but they're not caught up in the everyday things that catch other people up. You know, they're not worried about, in the same way, about the cultural affairs and the political intrigues of the country they're in, because they're not determined by that. They are representing their home country, and it's what's happening back home that influences them and the way that they conduct themselves. And in the same way, Paul says that we're Christ's ambassadors. If we're going to make a difference in the lives of others, we need to reflect Christ, so that God is able to make his appeal through our lifestyle. You see, when we remember who we are, it begins to change the atmosphere, because what's happening is we are strengthening ourselves inside so that the atmosphere inside is growing to become greater than the atmosphere around us. We're no longer as worried and as concerned about what's happening around us. We're more concerned about living out of the kingdom realities, living out of our citizenship as children of the Most High. That means you don't have to get caught up in the old ways of thinking. You don't have to be limited by the way that you used to limit yourself. You no longer have to accept what other people put upon you. When people say you can't do this, who do you think you are? You remember who you are. You're an ambassador through whom God is making his appeal to others. So you're called to live in ways that reflect kingdom realities, the grandeur of God's grace and mercy, not be weighed down by the negativity, by the limitations that other people may put on you. Another way of cultivating an atmosphere that is greater in you than that around you, so that you can begin to influence rather than be influenced, is simply to embody a spirit of praise. To embody a spirit of praise, to live with an attitude that reflects the joy of salvation, that reflects the fact that we are citizens of God, heaven, that we are God's children, that we are his ambassadors through whom he's making an appeal, that our hope is not conditioned by the circumstances of life, by what's happening around us, by what we have or what we don't have. It's conditioned and is a reflection of our relationship with God. That's what it means to worship. And in Psalm 47 verse 1, read, "Come everyone, clap your hands, shout to God with joyful praise." Why? For the Lord Most High is awesome. He's the great King of all the earth. You know, if you want to make a difference, if you want to be a hope carrier, if you want to cultivate an atmosphere that's inside of you that's greater than that around you so that you can influence, never lose sight of the fact that the Lord Most High is awesome. That nothing is too difficult for God. Don't look at God through the lens of the world, but look at the world through the lens of God. Because then you don't lose perspective. What happens is so many of us get so overwhelmed because we look at what's happening and we wonder, God, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? That we forget that he is the great King of all the earth, that he's still in control. He's working all things to good according to his time frame and his ways. And when we remember that, then we once more remember that he's awesome. That God is still God. That even in the midst of the turmoil that you may be experiencing, even in the midst of whatever's happening around you, he is still King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He is still the creator of the heavens and the earth. He is still the one who determines the seasons and the trajectories of life. And when we remember that, then what happens, it becomes easy to shout with joyful praise, to worship God, because we are reminding ourselves that no matter what's going on around us, God is still at work, and he alone is able. I love what it says in Psalm 100 verse 4, to enter his gates with thanksgiving, to go into his courts with praise, give thanks to him and praise his name. Like there's that sense of momentum as we go through life, never forgetting to worship, never forgetting to give thanks for his goodness, for his faithfulness. for His protection, for His comfort, for the things we take for granted. Could life be better? Maybe. But it could also be worse. Why is it not worse? Because of His goodness, because of His faithfulness. He knows what you need and He meets that need. He's carrying you. I think so often we're not going to fully appreciate just what God has done for us till we stand in heaven and we look back and we see the way He carried us and spared us so much of what we missed because we were focused on the wrong things. We should never tire of giving thanks and praise to God. You see, praise flows out of a relationship, not circumstances. It's a decision we make to declare our faith in God, that He is the one who is before all things and in whom all things are held together. He's the one that we worship. And as we do that, the atmosphere inside of us is building and building so that it can change the atmosphere around us because it's greater. Another way of cultivating and building an atmosphere that changes the environment around us is to manage our inner world, to manage our soul. Favourite proverb of mine is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, which says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. You see, everything flows out of what's in our heart. If you have bitterness in your heart, it's going to touch every aspect of your life. If you have resentment in your heart, it's going to affect every aspect of your life. If you have disappointment, if you have a sense of rejection, it's going to affect every part of your life. If you carry these things, for example, it's going to shape the way that you view other people. It's going to shape the way that you view your circumstances. You're going to see yourself as a victim. You're going to see yourself as somehow being passed over, as somehow being overlooked, as people are putting you down when they're not. It's going to affect the way that you handle your finances. You end up holding on rather than being generous. You see it as yours rather than as God trusting you to steward His resources. Guard your heart because it affects every part of your life. That means if you want to strengthen the atmosphere in you so that it'll change the atmosphere around you, then you need to deal with things like your thoughts and feelings. The negative things, the hurts that come in, you need to acknowledge they're there and let God begin to deal with them. You need to resolve it. You need to, the hurt, the guilt, the disappointments, the frustrations. You can't just pretend they're not there because they affect every part of your life. You need to bring them before God and say, Lord, I can't stop these things coming in, but I don't have to let them stay. Help me let go of them. Help me process them. Whatever is needed, whatever healing, whatever perspective is needed in whatever area, then you need to let God help you through that so that you're guarding your heart and you're shaping the atmosphere that's being built inside of you. You can't stop so much of what happens around you, but you don't have to let it stay inside of you. And the other side of that, of managing your inner world, managing your soul, is to manage your outer world. In Psalm 101, verse 2 to 4, David says, "I will be careful to live a blameless life. I will lead a life of integrity." And then he says, this is how I plan to do it. I'll refuse to look at anything vile and vulgar. I'll hate all who deal crookedly. I'll have nothing to do with them. I will reject perverse ideas and stay away from every evil. In other words, he says, I'm going to be disciplined and careful about what I let into my world. I'm going to be an ambassador, so to speak, but I'm not going to let it shape me. I'm going to put boundaries in place. He says, I'm going to be careful about what I set my eyes upon. I'm going to be careful about how I view things so that I don't get desensitized to the things that offend God, so that I just accept them. I want them to offend me as well, so that I'm continually drawing from God and looking at Him and inviting Him into my life so that, pardon me, so that I can build an atmosphere inside of me, an atmosphere of faith that is greater than the atmosphere of this world. That means you've got to ask yourself, what do you watch? Or what do you listen to? Who do you hang out with? Are these people building you up? Are they strengthening your faith? Are they encouraging you? Or are they pulling you down? You see, if you want to step into the fullness of what God has for you this year, if you've made plans and you've got dreams and you've set goals, if you want to walk into the fullness of those, then you need to be careful about what you surround yourself with. It doesn't mean you cut off contact with people who don't know God or anything like that, because we're called to change them by the way we live out of our faith. Remember, we're ambassadors and God's making his appeal through us. But it means, why hang out with people who are negative? Why hang out with people who are not interested in building their life? Why would I sit down and just blob in front of the TV watching things that are negative, that are robbing me of the joy of my salvation, of the joy of faith, of pulling me down, filling me with fear, of just reinforcing worldly values rather than feeding into the values that I have as a follower of God? If you want to build a strong spiritual atmosphere that's going to influence others, you've got to manage your outer world. And then there's this thought here that you have to release the life of God. You can't just keep it inside. I use the analogy of a balloon that's just blown up with natural breath is susceptible to the atmosphere around it, and it's drawn down. And in the same way, a balloon that's filled with helium, because the atmosphere inside is greater than the atmosphere around, it so to speak, it rises above it. It's not pulled down by it. And for us to make a difference around us, we need to take responsibility for consciously letting the river of life that's in us flow into the lives of others. In John 7, verse 38, anyone who believes in me may come and drink, for the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from their heart. We've got to be realistic, and we've got to take responsibility for the fact that the river that God pours himself into our lives so that he can flow through us. We're not a reservoir that God fills up for our sake. God is at work helping us manage our inner world, manage our outer world, filling us with his presence so that the river of life can flow. We have to consciously think, how do I let what's inside of me influence others? How do I live out of my faith in ways that can demonstrate the kingdom of heaven? How can I live in ways that point people beyond what is to God? That means you've got to think about, how do you conduct yourself? Do people see you as different? Do people just see you as somehow, look, I don't know what they believe, but there's something about their life? Or are you just one of a number? Like at work, do people seek you out? Are people drawn to you? Do people enjoy being in your company? Do people enjoy the wisdom that you share, the perspectives, the encouragement that you have? You see, these are all ways of letting that river flow, of letting the life of God that's at work in you overflow into the lives of others. You see, and when we begin to do that, what happens is we're beginning to change the environment around us. We're changing the atmosphere of the world that's around people that's negative, that tends to create anxiety, that creates fear, that creates distrust. We're changing that with an atmosphere of hope, an atmosphere of faith, an atmosphere that is shaped by heaven rather than the things of this world. And if we do that, then it empowers us and enables us to walk in ways that help us step into the goals and the dreams that we have for 2026. So I just want to encourage you with that thought, that as you make your plans, counting on God to direct you, as you press into him for all he has for you, don't neglect to create an atmosphere in you that is going to change the atmosphere around you. Don't neglect to be a hope carrier, to make a difference in other people's lives. Don't just try and hold everything to yourself. Your goals and your dreams are not about, or should never be about yourself. They should always be about the things of God, because that's what it means to be a hope carrier, to live and seek the good of others for the glory of the one who gave himself for us. So I'm going to leave it there and wrap up. And I hope that as we begin to move into the routines again, as we go through the latter weeks of January and we begin to anticipate February and we begin to build things back up again, that you don't just treat what's been happening over the last few weeks as just a welcome relief, but let it rest and let that rest refuel you. Let it begin to stir your heart and carry that with you through the coming weeks and months, so that when you get to the end of this year, that you can look back and say, wow, what a great year. I wasn't overwhelmed. In fact, I overwhelmed my circumstances. I wasn't brought down. And in fact, I lifted others up as you kept your focus on the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. So I look forward to catching up with you in person as you come back from holiday. For those of you who don't reside here in the capital, so good to have this time with you. I pray that 2026 is a fantastic year for you. I pray that it brings you great joy and great fulfillment. And I look forward to journeying with you as you tune in with us. But until I catch you again, God bless you.